Last week on Newsroom, you saw a conversation with the Human Rights Commission in the Eastern Cape. Their Provincial Director, Dr. Eileen Carter, explaining that over 100 children have died from starvation in the Eastern Cape in just the last year. At the same time, she said that, in fact, as a country, we destroy a huge amount of edible food that could be used. Andy du Plessis is the Managing Director of Food Forward, a food charity. They supply food to other charities. Andy, good afternoon to you. Do you agree with Dr. Carter here? Do we destroy a huge amount of edible food?
Afternoon, Stephen, and thank you. Absolutely, we do. According to the Center for Scientific and Industrial Research, around 1/3 of all the food that we produce ends up as lost or wasted in landfills, which is, it's just a huge waste, not only of the food, but the input resources such as electricity and water, the human capital, and, of course, financial capital. When you add all of that, it's just ludicrous what's happening in our own country.
Where does this food go? Why does so much of it get wasted?
So across the food system, from farmers, pack houses, wholesalers, retailers, manufacturers, quick service restaurants, and everyone in between that's involved with food, there are always huge amounts of surpluses simply because of things like over-ordering, incorrectly labeled goods, errors during the forecasting phase, errors during the manufacturing process, and not enough orders, etc. So there are always surpluses in the food system, and what suppliers usually do in order to make sure that prices remain constant at the levels at which they set it with either manufacturers or retailers, they dump that food so that it doesn't influence the market and what the market is charging at the moment. So huge amounts, copious amounts of our food is ending up in landfills as we speak.
And households also waste food, right? I mean, many households will throw out leftovers. They won't eat everything. I mean, salad in particular often doesn't get eaten.
Absolutely. According to the CSIR's report, about 18% of the food loss and waste occurs at the consumer level, at household level, simply because things that are, for example, things that are past their best before date but not yet expired, a lot of consumers see that as a problem, and they discard that food without checking it, without smelling it, without tasting it, and a lot of that food is actually still good for human consumption.
Okay, so what do we do to fix this? I mean, this is a huge amount of food, from what you say, 1/3 of what we produce. People also throw food out. I mean, restaurants and food companies and all the rest aren't in the business of throwing money away. They throw food away because they clearly believe that's the best option for them.
And that, I think, is the exact problem. I think the food system is so traditional that although they try and make sure that they reduce losses, that because of the fast-moving consumer goods industry, they want to get rid of the food because they need the storage space, because they need to make space for new foods, etc. So a lot of them are actually, the solution is actually just to dump that food and pass prices onto the consumer, which is what's happening now. And what we see now is a conflation of that happening over the last few years, where things like load shedding has also impacted, and the cost to mitigate against load shedding. And so those prices that are coming through now are actually artificially priced because they're making accommodations for huge amounts of third-party companies that are dumping the food on their behalf in landfills. And it's avoidable. And companies can save huge amounts of money, which is why we partner with hundreds of farmers, manufacturers, wholesalers, and retailers that have seen this. Once they see the benefits of donating food and saving money on their bottom line, it's actually a no-brainer. But we have to convince the food system to act differently with regard to identifying surplus food earlier and making sure that we get that food to communities in need.
Is our food system more or less wasteful than in other countries? I mean, do we waste more food than other people do?
So globally, according to the World Food Programme, according to the United Nations Environment Programme, roughly 1/3 of all the food produced across globally is wasted. The United States is the worst waster of food, but simply because the economics, there are over 400 million people in that country. So this is a global phenomenon, which is why the United Nations, according to the Sustainable Development Goals, according to 12.3, they're pushing for sustainable consumption and production. And food loss and waste is the third largest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions in the world. So it makes sense that South Africa, who is a signatory to the SDGs of the United Nations, should look at this. But in South Africa, we don't have regulations governing food donations, reducing food donations, and creating an enabling environment for food system actors to donate that food.
Okay, so where would we start with changes here? I mean, obviously we would need to change the law, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. No one's going to do anything until next year's elections, I'm sure. Like me, you and I would agree on that. So where do we start? I mean, part of it is also just about food collection. I mean, you would like to think that in neighborhoods there would be, you know, this is where you can leave your leftovers. This is where you can leave whatever it is. The same, and you know, similar system for restaurants, food processing companies, all sorts of things.
Absolutely. So we've got solutions for both options. So, for example, if a farmer, while he's harvesting, all their post-harvest surpluses that are out of specification for whoever they are growing, we'll collect that because our vehicles can be on site while they are harvesting. Manufacturing plants, while their goods are manufactured and they found that there's a problem, our trucks are there to collect. We also have a digital platform that connects our food stores, such as retailers like Woolworths, Pick and Pay, Food Lovers Market, to local non-profit organizations that are within a 5-kilometer radius. So we even have tech solutions that are solving this problem. And so there's a lot of actors that are seeing the benefits of reducing food loss and waste and saving on their bottom line. But still a huge amount, 49% of our food loss and waste takes place in the manufacturing sector. But one of the limiting factors around that is liability, strict liability according to the Consumer Protection Act. However, we find that behavior change is also reducing food loss and waste. So more than a year ago, we worked with the Consumer Goods Council of South Africa, and we are encouraging their actors or their members to donate surpluses past their best before date, but still edible and good for human consumption. And we have found that the surplus food donated has nearly doubled just in the past year. And so now we are working with the South African Bureau of Standards to develop a guideline which is voluntary, but which food system actors can now use to donate surpluses. So that guideline will take a few months to be able to put together, but it will certainly take shorter than legal or regulatory changes into Parliament. So we are working with the SABS and food system actors to reduce food loss and waste using this guideline, which is already being implemented, and we're waiting for that framework to be worked out.
And you're also seeing more demand. I mean, so many other charities tell us, and we've seen how high food price inflation has been. We see how desperate people are. We see, for various reasons, in the Eastern Cape, a few stories that sort of captured our imagination because of just how awful they are. You're still seeing huge demand, let me use a different word, huge need for food.
Absolutely. We are finding that the amount of the demand for food from non-profit organizations that have services in communities has increased 400-fold. And we get about 300, 400 applications every month, and only 5% of them we approve into our network to receive food every single month. And two reasons for that. The first is that a lot of non-profits, while they're doing good work, they don't have the criteria needed to be able to qualify for food assistance from Food Forward SA. And secondly, we need to make sure that the amount of food donated into our organization is able to meet the demand of our network. Currently, we support nearly 3,000 registered non-profit organizations across the country, including rural communities, that are reaching close to 1 million vulnerable people on a daily basis, just using surplus food. So the benefits are huge, but the demand out there is even greater.
If you look at things like this, I mean, I don't know if there's any political will in our politicians, in the people who make the food, the capitalists behind it, but also the good farmers and the workers behind it. Do you get a sense that anyone's actually willing to change anything? Or is this just how it is, that 1/3 of our food is destined to be wasted?
So that is a very good question. So we actually had a meeting with the National Department of Health. And we said to them, let's meet to discuss how the Foodstuffs Act can be amended to promote food donations. The initial reaction was, we are not changing anything. The parliamentary list is long, and it's difficult to get those changes enacted or onto the parliamentary list anyway. But then we asked for a meeting with them, and they came to a meeting at our offices here in Cape Town, and they saw firsthand how the food banking model works, all the amount of food that's been donated. And immediately there was a shift, and they said, okay, how can we help? So the labeling guidelines were up for public comment, and it closed in the middle of September. And they've undertaken that in the labeling guidelines, they will look at firstly a definition for food donation, support for food donations, and then to encourage food donations across the food system. And that's a big start, I think. The Department of Trade and Industry have blatantly said to us, we are not interested in making regulatory changes. So we are working with NEDLAC's Cost of Living Rapid Response Committee and the Department of Trade and Industry, and we say to them that is not acceptable. We need to work together around solutions, especially towards 2030 as a signatory, and there are huge opportunities here that could benefit South Africa without it having to cost us much to be able to do so. So on the Health Department side, there is a willingness to work with us, but the Department of Trade and Industry needs a bit more work. Fortunately for us, the Department of Agriculture has also now seen the amounts of huge losses and waste ending up in landfill. So they've put together a draft piece of policy that we've made comment on, where they are also saying, let's reduce food loss and waste by diverting food and making sure that that gets to non-profit organizations earlier. So there is appetite across government to be able to do this, and it just requires further engagement.
Andy du Plessis, thank you. Managing Director at Food Forward SA. Do appreciate the time.